I was thinking that 70 years, I keep hearing 70 years, and I subtracted that from my 84 years. How many people here are as old or older than I am right now? Let me see. Fair number. I'd like to ask, that reminded me that I was 14 then, and those of you who just raised your hands, I saw about 15, I'd be interested afterwards, if you have time, to let me know what your memory is of the bomb when it first happened. And if any of you have, might not, any have the same memory that I have very vividly, and I won't go into why I happen to have this, was graced with this memory, but that I felt very great dismay at this event and at Harry Truman's exuberant description of the greatest thing in history and the fact that God had given it to the U.S. Rather than the others, and how wonderful it was. Even though it did soon drop the war, I felt a very ominous thing had happened. See, there's the background to that, how I happened to feel that way. I wasn't alone. I've met a number of others here and there, all very isolated at the time from their fellow Americans who were only celebrating the fact that the war was ending. In fact, very quickly, anybody else here remember feeling much the same way I did at that time? I see several hands. I'd like to hear about that later. But of course, we were fed the line then and later, especially, how necessary it had been, how justified. My perception at that time, at 14, hasn't really ever changed, though I've studied the history very much. I've never been a pacifist. I was not one when I joined the Marines. I wasn't when I went to Vietnam later, meaning that I don't regard all killing in war as murder, necessarily. But a lot of killing in war is murder. And as Chelsea Manning showed, with the video of people being shot down, point blanks, unarmed civilians, including, it turned out, a couple of children from a helicopter. And if you haven't seen that, I urge you to look it up on YouTube, Collateral Murder. You'll get it. He was very much criticized, and Julian Assange, who made it available, for using this provocative title, Collateral Murder, instead of damage. But to me, as a former Marine who taught laws of war, as a company commander, it was very obvious that what you were looking at in shooting down these unarmed civilians who were not posing any kind of threat, that was murder. The killing at Hiroshima was murder, mass murder. Terrorism, the killing of civilians, non-combatants for a political purpose or any other kind of purpose, terrorism, and mass murder. Nothing other. It should not have happened. It did not need to happen. It should never happen again. And yet, I turned down the chance to speak, actually, at a 40th anniversary reunion in Hiroshima, having been sent an air ticket to go and everything. I found I couldn't bring myself to speak to people at Hiroshima again. I'd been there twice before on this 40th anniversary, with their cenotaph there, the epigraph saying, "Rest in peace, those who lie here. The crime shall not be repeated," sometimes translated as, "the error shall not be repeated" for American ears, but the original Japanese was, "the crime shall not be repeated." I couldn't say in good faith that I really felt the crime would not be repeated. It hasn't been in those terms for 70 years, and many people credit the nuclear weapons with that. They say, thanks to those, we haven't had a major all-out war, and it's because of that people have, we haven't had the war. So they're grateful to the weapons, just as so many Americans were grateful, our age and older, grateful to the bomb for saving their brothers and their uncles and their fathers from invading Japan, in the false belief that that was the alternative. Okay, so people live with this gratitude. The problem is that that kind of peace, such as it was bought with a continuous building and modernizing and deploying of weapons that made it the possibility of mass murder ever present, and I mean from minute to minute, and especially, of course, in major crises like the Cuban Missile Crisis. The fact is that right now, 70 years later, right now, if you read the papers about Ukraine, you're looking at threats and possibilities and deployments of Russian and U.S. troops in the vicinity of Ukraine that confronts us with the possibility of fighting between Russians and U.S. troops in a way that has never happened, but has never been this close since the Cuban Missile Crisis 52 years ago, 53 years ago. We're facing, I think, and now this time both sides, then it was us, this side's both Putin and the U.S. are talking about the possible first use of nuclear weapons. And for the last 25 years, we've now known nuclear weapons used between the U.S. and Russia will cause, from the smoke of the burning cities on the target plans that I worked on, and are worked on in Russia, the smoke will go lofted to the stratosphere, as in Hiroshima, by a higher firestorm, but simultaneously, thousands of cities, pillars of smoke, that will join around the globe, blot out the sunlight sufficiently to kill harvests around the world, and condemn nearly the entire population of the world to death. The doomsday machine, the end. We've known that not at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but for the last 25 years. And yet these threats go on. The threats go on, and they are threats of ending nearly all life. And I'm being very precise here. Physicists like Alan Roebuck says probably there will be some humans, we're so adaptable, left somewhere eating fish and mollusks in an island somewhere. There may be 1 million, maybe 10 million. Humans won't be totally extinct. Only the other 7 billion will be, along with the primates. And that's what they're talking about right now. We're at greater danger. That's outrageous. Is it worth doing everything we can to prolong the period before this human outrageous folly and criminality result in this kind of war? I'll bet that all over the world today, or all over this country, there are groups like this. Some smaller, I've been at smaller, and some larger. If it hadn't been for groups like this, we would have had the nuclear war earlier, as well as testing in the atmosphere and otherwise. There's a whole story on that. In 1969, it was the moratorium where people like this all over the country were gathered on October 15th, 1969, and led Nixon to abort his threats of initiating nuclear war in Vietnam. And we didn't know he was making those threats. We didn't know he was having that attitude. I want to end with a 2-minute exercise here, one to prepare and one other that some of you have heard me before. And it bears on the question of why we're doing this and why working without assurance that we will succeed in avoiding this extinction. There is no assurance. I cannot describe myself as having faith that we will avoid this. But we have a chance, and I want to indicate the importance of every moment, the 10 years we're buying with Iran deal out of another entry into the nuclear club. The importance of all that. The bomb is usually described, always almost, as having exploded at 8:15. When I was at Hiroshima, I noticed something odd. In all the museums and the illustrations of the bomb with artifacts from the bomb, there were watches that stopped when the bomb exploded. Very striking, all at the same time. They were all pretty accurate, together. And they were not stopping at 8:15. They were stopping closer to 8:16. And that was odd to me. So I looked up the history of it, and I found that the bomb was dropped at 8:15 from the Enola Gay, but it took 43 seconds to fall. It was on a parachute to give the plane time to get away, and so it fell. People saw the plane, but they didn't notice too much the thing falling. They went around their daily business at 8:15 to 8:16. So I'm going to ask you, it only takes a minute here now, to close your eyes when I say so, and imagine yourself, Japanese, lying with your loved one in bed, let's say, in the morning, or at the breakfast table with your family, or walking to work through gardens, as people have described their last minute. At 8:15, all of these people were doomed. but they had 43 seconds in which to live on Earth with other people. Try that. Be there. I'll tell you when. Okay, now start. The bomb has dropped. Close your eyes and imagine yourself living in Hiroshima. Longer than you thought, wasn't it? Time for a baby to be conceived or even born. Time to look at flowers, time to say goodbye to your child leaving for school, as many of them were. Time to live, an amazing amount of time. Every minute of that is precious. It's what we're threatening altogether, and we shouldn't be. That every minute like that, let alone 70 years or another 70 years, is precious to have with us these memories. Once, just before the May Day event, where we all got arrested in May Day in Washington in 1971, just before the Pentagon Papers, the movie Little Man with Dustin Hoffman had just come out, and I remember saying to people at this rally before we went to Washington, the Sioux have a saying which is repeated several times in the movie. Come, brothers, this is a good day to die. And I said, it's never really a good day to die, but this is a good day to get arrested. And that's today. Thank you for being here.
Chizu is a member of No Nukes Action. For more than 3 years, she's organized rallies on the 11th day of every month at the Japanese consulate in San Francisco. Go.
Good morning. This is a clothing many Japanese women wore during the war, ran away from the air raids. The USA, with newly invented napalm bombs, scorched over 200 cities and killed and injured more than 1 million people. So this is anyway clothing. So I'm wearing right now. I was born in Japan and grew up in the post-war climate that has shaped the way I see the world. A couple of months ago, I had a chance to speak about Japanese militarism. During a talk, I mentioned that dropping atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were war crimes. When Q&A session came, a member of the audience expressed her opinions that Japan didn't apologize to the USA. Why should USA have to apologize to Japan? All opinions are valid. But I wondered if this person really knew the horrible effect of the atomic bombs. And I really wondered that she had ever chance to know the fact of the aftermath of atomic bombings. 2 atomic bombs massacred over 100,000 people. The total of 200,000 people were died in the year. Over 600,000 people have died up to this day due to 2 atomic bombs. Most of these deaths were civilians. People didn't die instantly. They suffered greatly, like burns and disfiguration, blood abnormality, and they took a last breath. The suffering is unimaginable. And even now, after 70 years later, this after effect remains such as leukemia, airborne cataract, cancers, birth defect, mental retardation, and the fear of birth defect in children will last for generations. In 2014, Asahi newspaper researched 58 American textbooks for junior high school and high school, and then even 40 books didn't mention anything about the Nagasaki death toll. And of the books mentioned of the number of deaths, they reported only half of the number that Japan provided to the United Nations. And only 5 books mentioned that the radiation effect lasts for many years. For all of us, I think very important to let the people know how horrible the atomic bombs are. They are so inhumane. Because atomic bombs should never be built, and they ruin the humankind, animals, and the entire earth. So Japan has experienced 2 atomic bombs. Did Japan learn from Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Sadly, answer is no. The US wanted to sell the nuclear power plant as atoms for peace. Japan foolishly bought them. Of course, many Japanese are very sensitive and afraid of the nuclear power plant at that time. But Matsutaro Shoriki, who was called as father of nuclear energy, created a big newspaper company and started brainwash people by mass media that nuclear power plants are safe, cheap, and efficient. Then the government and he succeeded. Altogether, 54 nuclear power plants were built on tiny earthquake-prone islands. 4.5 years ago, when Fukushima Daiichi melted down, we have awakened the wild. A report by the Congress research concluded that this accident is a man-made. An accident that would have been prevented if they had prepared for it, but they didn't, because there has been deep collusion between industry and then regulatory, nuclear regulatory regulator, and then Japanese government. The Japanese government has been lying to not only Japanese, also to the people of the world. As you know, when the Prime Minister Abe told that when he invited 2020 Olympic to Tokyo, he said the Fukushima accident is under control. And of course, this is a lie. It has such high radiation that people cannot even get close to the core of a reactor. So we don't know exactly what happened about the reactor, and then we don't know the reactor core is now inside the vessel or outside. Even they sent the robot. Many times, all have broken down. Radiation is seeping out every day into the air, into the Pacific Ocean. There are more than 100 children who were diagnosed with thyroid cancer. The evacuees are forced back to live in the contaminated areas. The tragedy has continued, and the daunting task has just begun. When people needed to seek the truth to save their victims and protest the government policies, the government created the secrecy law, which has passed on December 2013. This secrecy law is so vague that the bureaucrats and politicians can designate the state secret to their liking. People seeking the state secret and disclose the secret can be punished with up to 5 years in prison. Then came reinterpretation of our pacifist constitution. These bills have already passed, approved in the lower parliament, and will pass the upper parliament in this summer. The law allows our self-defense force to go outside to join the U.S. war. Japan seems as if want to be prosperous by the war. So Henoko base has been pushed to be built, and Okinawa people's sufferings never end. The law has been created and changed to go forward Japanese militarism. Japan can export war weapons now. Japan can send the military to outside to kill people. Now Japan needs nuclear weapons. Japan has 48 tons of plutonium. These can be created into 6,000 nuclear weapons. Japan has been keeping the nuclear power plants for the potential of creating nuclear power creating the nuclear weapons and to make the threat to the neighboring countries. This is the reason the Japanese government never give up nuclear power plant. Even after the Fukushima disaster, they have pushed very hard to restart the next plant. So the Sendai nuclear power plant will restart actually coming 11th, 5 days from today. Even though it is located at a huge, nearby at a huge active volcano. And the next nuclear power plants are lined up for restarting. What can we do? We must keep on protesting. We must never give up. Because the spirits of Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims are here now and are wishing the abolition of nuclear power plants.
Hi, I'm Scott Yundt. I'm the staff attorney at Tri-Valley Cares, Communities Against a Radioactive Environment, which is a watchdog organization here in Livermore, California. Part of my duties as staff attorney is to represent workers of Livermore Lab and Sandia, California, who have been made ill by on-the-job exposure at the lab. Typically, those workers have been exposed to radiation and a plethora of toxic and radioactive chemicals at the lab in their work developing and researching nuclear weapons.
Are you saying there's a cancer epidemic among lab workers? I mean, are a lot of lab workers getting cancer?
Well, your question appears to be about current lab workers, and there definitely is contamination that affects current lab workers. I don't think I could call it a cancer epidemic. But in terms of former lab employees, this is a facility that's been operating since 1952 and has had thousands of employees over that time. Many of them 10, 15 years after retirement find that they are extremely and abnormally ill with rare cancers, with rare diseases. There's a metal called beryllium that really has very few industrial uses other than nuclear weapons. And many workers at Livermore Lab, we're talking probably around 100 or so, have been exposed to beryllium and come down with a deadly illness called beryllium disease. And of course, we're talking about in 2015. Many of these workers died decades ago and had no formal representation, there was no federal process for them to get benefits. Now there is a federal process for them to attempt to get health benefits and to get compensation, and I help them try to do that, although it's very bureaucratic and difficult. But it has illuminated to the community how many of these workers there are. And like I said, many of them probably died decades ago, but we're talking in the neighborhood of 3,000 workers who are still alive. Some are current, most are former employees who are currently seeking benefits from a federal program that's been created for them.
Well, there was recently a decision in Korea that a Korean woman got cancer from the nuclear plant. The industry says that there is no correlation between cancer at nuclear plants and facilities like this to cancer. Why have they been able to say that and get away with it?
I mean, that's a really good question. Specifically in the nuclear weapons industry, the original Atomic Energy Act of 1954 said there shall never be any liability to workers in the nuclear weapons industry. In terms of nuclear power, I mean, I think it's ridiculous to assume that there's no exposure when we know, especially from nuclear power, that tritium is released. We know in nuclear weapons there's also a plethora of radioactive substances that workers are exposed to. In nuclear weapons work, the workers all wear a dosimeter badge, which captures certain types of radiation, although not all. And of course, it's just a badge they wear on their body, so it does not capture everything they might be getting exposed to, but they wear that because there's acknowledgement that they are getting very exposed, in fact. And it's absurd to think that there wouldn't be any exposures, because there definitely is.
I mean, the experience of a worker getting cancer from this facility, isn't that a nightmare? I mean, just to fight to have to get health care and try to get taken care of in this dire straits? What's it like? I mean,
it really is so difficult, because I think that there's still an atmosphere inside of this lab that of machismo, for lack of a better word, that their work here is for nuclear weapons and has this purpose, and they just don't acknowledge that they might be getting injured on the job. And radiation is invisible. It has no taste, no smell. You can't see it. So, for them, getting sick feels very vulnerable and embarrassing. And, of course, people get cancer in lots of contexts, but there are very rare ones and a very clear correlation here. And for them to acknowledge it in their community often means getting shunned by the other workers. The lab does not initially support them. It's a separate program outside of the lab that they have to apply to. They're almost seen as a whistleblower of sorts, and we all know that whistleblowers often face backlash.
Now, the U.S. government is now trying to raise the limits of what they say is safe radioactive exposure. And in Japan, the government has said you can overcome radiation and you can decontaminate Fukushima. What is this kind of ideology or theories that they're putting out?
Well, it's clearly coming from the industry, and I think it's interesting to acknowledge that in the U.S. we already have a different level of exposure for workers than we do for the general public. And
what is the difference?
It's an order of magnitude that workers are allowed to get exposed to greater than the public background would be from a facility like this. And of course, the workers are much closer to the sources of contamination and of radiation. So, that's just the industry trying to do this work and not have to be responsible.
Have there been people in Livermore that have gotten cancer who live in the community of this plant?
Well, it's very hard to get ongoing public health studies. The ones that happened were in the early 90s, and they showed that there was an increase in the rate of melanoma, malignant melanoma, among children who grew up in Livermore in their early 20s. They would get malignant melanoma. And this was something like 6 times greater than in other counties in California. And it was directly correlated to exposures emanating from Livermore Lab. And that's children who grew up in Livermore. There, of course, have also been public health studies done on employees that specifically in the 90s showed very high rates of malignant melanoma among employees. We also have a higher rate of other childhood cancers in Livermore, about 3 times the rate of other communities in California. But again, that's based on data from the 1990s, and the state does not have funds or willingness to do ongoing public health studies in this community.
Strange that despite the fact that there's increased danger of cancer, generally, that there are no statistics or no serious program to really investigate the correlation of cancer to facilities like this and nuclear plants as well?
I definitely find that strange. It's an interesting correlation in terms of the fact that Livermore is a relatively affluent and privileged community, yet it has this facility in it that's contaminating it at the same time. And our focus in this country tends to be on sources of contamination, which usually are not in affluent communities. They are in more in poorer communities, and I think that's an appropriate focus in general, but it does leave certain places like this one without very much attention based on the idea that it's safe and the community is affluent and not being affected by it. But I think the truth is really the opposite. This is a very directly affected community and deserves more attention than it gets.
I'm from Doro-Chiba, Japanese railway. I'm here because we are opposing nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons. And our friends in Japan are holding big rally against nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons in Hiroshima. At this protest, we're emphasizing workers' power. Workers can stop nuclear power plant, nuclear weapons, because only workers can produce and transport everything in the earth. Doro-Chiba's sister union, Doro-Mito, are launching strikes against nuclear power and working conditions and very contaminated places, radioactive exposure of workers.
And the government says that they've decontaminated Fukushima.
Yeah, decontamination is impossible. It's fraud, period.
And they say that they can raise the radiation limit that people have in Japan to make radiation safe.
Yeah. Before the earthquake, radiation limit is 1 millisievert for ordinary people and 5 millisievert for nuclear professionals. But now they are raising 200 millisievert for nuclear professionals. It's outrageous.
And what does this have to do with Abe's militarization and trying to change the Constitution and the secrecy laws?
Yeah. Many people are now rising up against Abe. 60% of Japanese people are opposing Abe's new legislation. Only 20% or so are supporting Abe. Now we are winning. It's doomsday for the capitalist government.
And the idea that you can start the Sendai plant and put the whole country in danger, are these people insane? Why would they open up another nuclear plant with the earthquakes and the other dangers that there could be another Fukushima in Japan?
They are desperate to rearm Japanese military forces. They want to arm with nuclear weapons. So they cannot stop nuclear programs in Japan, including nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plant is a part of the scheme to nuclear armament in Japan. Obama supports somewhat Japanese nuclear program, but at the same time, Japanese government is scheming inter-imperialist rivalry against U.S. government. So it's a very complicated program. Now, Obama administration and Abe administration in Japan are doing somewhat, so to say, political acrobat. It's very important for Japanese anti-nuke movement because Livermore and Los Alamos are the central place for nuclear armament in the United States and around the world. Many nuclear warheads in Okinawa. It's an open secret. And now in Okinawa, people are rising up against Henoko new military base construction, and they want to launch a general strike against military bases. They, in Okinawa, have general strikes in early 1970s. So, military-based workers can stop military bases and war. Japanese workers are now starting to regain their self-confidence. We, Japanese workers, believe in tremendous power in the U.S. working class and people who are fighting against war and nuclear power and nuclear weapons. It is very powerful. International solidarity is very powerful.
Now, also the remilitarization of Japan has meant that letters are being sent to students in Japan that they may be drafted. What has been the response of young people, high school students, to this remilitarization and the threat of a draft of young people?
Yeah, more and more young people are now gathering in front of the parliament, Japanese parliament. It's very, very huge rallies, not only in Tokyo, but also all around Japan. It's a historic uprising of younger generation.
High school students.
High school students.
How many are marching? How many are rallying?
Yeah, I don't know because the rally are growing day by day.
3,000, 4,000?
3,400 or 10,000 or perhaps millions.
When was the last time that happened? High school students mobilizing against war?
Yeah, I don't know because
in the 70s, 60s, 70s, young people.
Young people, yeah. In 1970s, tens of thousands of high school students demonstrated, yeah, all around the world.
So this was the last time in the 70s that there was a mass mobilization of high school students.
Yeah.
The high school students don't want to be drafted. They don't want to go to war.
Yeah.
So they were sent letters by the government.
The government, local education board are distributing letters for what to say?
Draft registration.
Yeah, and and money for universities. They say that if you enter the military, the self-defense force, you must not repay the loan, student loan. So poverty draft is happening also in Japan. Leadership of Rengo is supporting Abe administration, and UA Zensen, the largest union in Rengo, is not only supporting war legislation, but draft. They oppose former Rengo policy opposing draft. There are many rank-and-file workers who attend the rallies against Abe administration. Many rank-and-file workers of Rengo are opposing their own leadership. And the Doro-Chiba and Doro-Mito, Japanese militant railway workers, are now openly fighting against Rengo leadership, and they call for overthrow of Rengo leadership and take back Rengo. 労働者の力は無限です。労働者が国際連帯すれば必ず勝てる。We hold a international labor rally in November, and we invite many U.S. labor activists to our rally in November the 1st. There, also Korean workers come together. Korean workers launched general strike on November the 14th, and they'll certainly overthrow their own government, Park Geun-hye government. So, Korean government and Japanese government and U.S. government are now planning to launch a military invasion when North Korean regime collapsed. So the international solidarity and three countries, Korea, Japan, and United States, is ever more important now. Okay. So please come our rally.
いや、今回の集まりものすごく良かったっていう思うのは、日本人の方のスピーカーが素晴らしかった。まあ他の人ももちろん素晴らしかったんだけど、今の日本がどうなってるか、今の日本がヌクレアウェポンっていう風なのをまあ潜在的に持っていて、それを使ってまあ緊張、アジアの緊張っていうのを中国との関係なり韓国との関係なり、高めてるっていう風なことをね、地図さんなんかが話してくれたってことはものすごい良かったと思うんですよね。70年前の話もすごく重要なんだけれども、やっぱしそういったものにあるにもそういう経験があるにもかかわらず、なんか日本が戦争っていうふうな緊張を高めてるっていうふうなことに対してやはり私たちは知っておかなくちゃならないと思うし、そういう意味ではすごく地図さんの発言良かったと思うし、それから被団協といいますかね、被爆者の団体があるわけですけれども、そこの方がやはり話して、今まではまあ原爆のことは話してもいいけれども、ヌクレアウェポン、要するにアトムズ・フォー・ピース、ヌクレアの平和利用っていうふうなことについては話せなかったんですよね。むしろまあ賛成するっていうふうに近いようなことしか言えなかったのが、今回やっぱり福島というふうな事実、ヌクレアでああいうひどい事態になってるっていうふうなことを明らかにして、それに対してやはり被団協としても、まあ、被爆者としても非常に強力なヌクレアの力っていうふうなのをね賛美するんじゃなくて、それでなんか打開をしていこうというふうなんじゃなくて、それをやっぱし否定していくっていうふうなね発言をしてくれたっていうのがものすごく重要なんじゃないかなっていうふうに聞いてて思いましたね。以上です。
County Sheriff's Office. You are in violation of California Penal Code 647C, blocking a roadway. On behalf of the state of California, I demand that you leave immediately. If you fail to leave, you will be arrested. Afraid.
対
原発反対
再稼働反対
再稼働反
原発反対原発反対再稼働反対
再稼働反対
原発反対
Even those I love, sky and the earth above in a submarine, nuclear submarine. We don't ever make a sound, we don't want to be found by the enemy. We're quiet as can be in our submarine, nuclear submarine. When we come up fast, and then we go right back down again, cruising the ocean floor, inside a machine of war, a submarine, a nuclear submarine. And there's a right way, and there's a wrong way, and there's a Navy way, so they say. Somebody please rescue me, I'm trapped inside my submarine. Everything is going black, I'll never get back from our submarine, nuclear submarine. One more time before I die, I want to see the earth and sky, water slowly seeping in, running out of oxygen in our submarine, nuclear submarine. And there's a right way, and there's a wrong way, and there's a Navy way, so they say, so they say, so they say.